Rhetorical Quest.
Let's talk just for a little bit about nonverbal communication. So verbal communication is words. It's everything that's words, everything about language that we know. It can be written words as verbal, oral words are verbal, sign language is verbal because it uses words. Nonverbal communication is everything else, everything that's not the words. And so it's everything that we communicate that can be touched, tasted, smelt, seen, heard, that is not the words. And nonverbal communication is going on all the time. It's continuous. It's pervasive. It gets into every little thing that we do. And it's sometimes intentional, but a lot of times our nonverbal communication is completely unintentional. And that's different than verbal communication. Now, you've already all probably said something at some point in your life that you would not have said, that you wish you hadn't said. And you can say something like, I didn't mean to say that, but you did mean it. You meant to make those words. You can't make words accidentally. You might not have meant everything that was implied in it and all the different ways that it can be interpreted, or a different way to interpret, but you did mean to say those words. Nonverbal communication, it can very much be something that you have no desire at all to communicate. I'm going to talk about communication and smell first, because it's actually probably the aspect of nonverbal communication that when we think about nonverbal communication, it's not what comes right to mind, but it is a definite part of nonverbal communication, right? The way we smell. Most of us shower pretty often. Quite a few Americans shower daily, which is not good for your skin, but we do it because we want to smell a particular way. Deodorant has just exploded since it came into being on the scene. In the 1960s, there were deodorant soaps, which were soaps with a lot of scent. So you got clean and you added a scent. We still have those today. And there were deodorants that were smells that you could put on to cover up the smell that you've got. But it was really in the 1960s that antiperspirant style deodorant came into being. And since that time, I mean, there were little attempts before then. Since that time, it has just exploded on the global market and continues to explode. It grows and grows and grows, this market for not just smelling good, which the other ones did, but taking the physical smell out. It's just fascinating. Another thing we don't usually talk about when we talk about nonverbal communication, but it is a part of it, is nonverbal communication and taste. And you might think, well, we don't taste each other, at least not under normal circumstances. And when we do, we'll probably talk about that in a second. What we talk about with taste is that we share flavors with each other, right? And so, you can see this video is Thanksgiving dinner, right? And so what happens at Thanksgiving dinner? Well, you eat the turkey, you eat the pumpkin pie, whatever. The traditional foods of a Thanksgiving dinner are turkeys, pumpkin pie, cranberry sauce, potatoes. These are all foods that did not exist in in Europe, and were imported in part of the Columbian Exchange. And so these foods tell that story of the first Thanksgiving, where Native Americans and the Puritan Pilgrims shared their food together. And there's parts of that story that probably aren't exactly true. But it's a beautiful story nonetheless, and we share that whole thing with food. Hardly ever do we actually talk about it as it's going on. So there's holidays, there's certain meals that's like, when you share this is a family meal and you want to share it with other people, just to let them know about you. There's certain foods sometimes you'll want to share of your ethnicity, or like to show you love a particular ethnicity. There's cooking for somebody just to show them that you care. We have dinner dates, and we have birthdays. What's birthday without birthday cake? Festivals. Every festival has a food that goes with it. Luncheons. I always think it's interesting when I go to a work luncheon, because I know what kind of work we're doing by what they give. Sometimes there are sandwiches with cold cuts and boxes of chips and bottles of water. I know, or that's a real work luncheon, right? It's not where it's just we're going to listen to a lecture there. We're going to actually get together and try and get some things done. Um, and just kind of anytime we share a food with somebody, we are trying to communicate something to them. We also communicate non-verbally via touch. Um, we normally, our touch conveys some kind of affection, or if not affection, at least, uh, recognition of somebody who's there. Of course, it's also communicating via physical touch, communicate nonverbal communication and touch. When you touch somebody really fast right in the nose to make them bleed, right? You punch somebody, that is definitely nonverbal communication. Um, we need touch in order to be healthy, both mentally and physically. Um, we need it for intimacy, and we need it just to survive. People die for lack of touch. And so we need this, and we use that need to communicate to others that we are fulfilling a need for them. When we get to talking about nonverbal communication and sound, we get to stuff that people really think about when they think about nonverbal communication. When we talk about nonverbal communication and sound, a lot of times in our public speaking classes, I teach pitch, patter, projection as three things that you need to do with your voice. You can convey emotions by changing your pitch. You can convey things by changing your patter. You can get loud and get soft depending on what you're wanting to do with people. And all of this conveys so much. But nonverbal communication and sound is more than that. It's music. It's when I want to really emphasize something, go clap my hands and just go for it, right? All of that is when I tap myself, when I thump the table. All of this stuff is ways that we communicate various ideas nonverbally through sound. Of course, we always think of gestures and body movements when we talk about nonverbal communication. And that's part of nonverbal communication and sight. We look at people and people look at us, and you can see my hands gesturing here in this movie. You can see the guy moving in the funny ways up above. And all of that is to show emotion, to show strength, to clarify things sometimes. Make them say, it's that big, right? All of that helps us communicate. One of our best tools for communicating nonverbally is our face. People look at our face. So it's nonverbal communication and sight. They look at our face, and we look at other people's faces. And for human beings, normally looking at another person's face shows that you're really, really paying attention to what they're saying. Now, in Western culture, we actually feel like looking somebody in the eye shows that you're honest and that you don't hate the person, right? That's one of the sure signs somebody hates you, right? Is they will look away when they're talking to you. We actually mean it's really important. And some people who are kind of neurodivergent, I'm a little neurodivergent in a few ways. Actually have trouble looking people in the eye, and we have to really work hard to learn to do it, and it never gets comfortable. People also communicate nonverbally with their clothes. Clothes are an important part of nonverbal communication and sight. I'm recording this video on a Friday, and WNMU has asked that I wear their logo on a purple shirt on Fridays. So I do. Why do they do that? Because they want to get a certain message out. In that case, if you can see a bunch of people wearing it, you know that there's a sense of belonging and a sense of shared self-worth. So those are important parts of uh, clothing, but most of the time I choose which clothes I'm going to put on in the morning. And yes, there's some ideas of comfort, some other ideas like that, but there's part of me that chooses these clothes because I want to look the part of a professor, because that's what I'm going into to do in the mornings. I dress the part. It's actually illegal to put on a a real looking police uniform and start going ordering people around. And why is that? Because you are lying with your clothes. You might never say, I'm a police officer, but you tell people to do things and they believe it because of your clothes. So clothes can be a really important part of nonverbal communication and sight. Another part of nonverbal communication that we see with our eyes is the way that we arrange physical space or make use of physical space. The way we design the flows of movement in and out. We tell people where we want them to go and where we don't want them to go, right? We block off certain spaces. We shut our doors. We build walls and fences to say we don't want people beyond this point, or you're only allowed beyond this point if you have our permission. Um, we do a lot of things like that. Uh, we set up tables in certain parts of the room with chairs at certain places because we're showing people this is how I would like you to sit. When you come in, I would like you to sit this way, which is why the things are laid out the way they are. That's called proxemics. Um, there's also another way we communicate by physical space, and that's like the distance that we get from each other. And this is part of sight too. Now, we generally talk about bubbles, right? And you are in my bubble, you need to back away, right? When we say that to somebody, usually we mean just our smallest bubble. Our smallest bubble is the intimate distance from us, which is about half a meter to our bodies, right? And right up to your bodies includes it. When people are in this space, people will pass through this space all the time, but when people stay in this space, they are communicating that they want to have some kind of intimate connection with you. I generally say they either want to fight or kiss, and maybe a little of both. I don't know, but that's that intimate distance is really for just our intimate friends. Not everybody comes in there. Not everybody comes into that space. We've got our personal distance. Our personal distance is about out to a meter, right? Even 2 meters, if we want to say that. About 6 feet. Personal distance is the distance in which you have personal conversations, right? You don't need to generally project to be heard over that kind of distance. You can have a personal conversation, and it's okay. We go start to go out to you know like 5 meters, and we end up with the social distance. Um, 4 meters maybe. The social distance is the distance in which you have social interactions, right? So if you're at a party and there are people a certain distance from you, those are the people who are with you. But there's probably people at the party a little further away, and you're not really paying any attention to them because they're outside of your social distance. Beyond that, we have our public distance, right? And at the public distance, it's the reason I said 7 meters before, even though a lot of research says 5 meters. Because the public distance at 7 meters, this is a biological fact, you need to have some kind of um, tool to move your voice beyond that. Before there were ever microphones, there were amphitheaters that used a flat surface coming up into things to reflect the sound up. Those worked really, really well. People would go out on boats to reflect the sound up. Sometimes people realize their voices can carry an echo down if they're in a curved thing. So you could go into like traditional theater and the edges are curved and point everything around you. Or people would put the mountains behind them when they were just going to speak outside to make everything curve around them and make that sound. But just normally, going into the public distance, you need some kind of help. You can yell, but even just projecting isn't going to get to them there. So that's something to keep in mind. And it drives me nuts. This is just a personal thing as a communication guy. When people say, I have a good voice and project, I don't need a microphone. When you're in a room that's more than, 25 feet large, at that point, we're looking at it as no, actually, people can hear you maybe, but they can't make out the words. Not well, not at a distance. Another way of physical space and how we use nonverbal communication and sight is when people do things to make sure we know it's their territory, right? So we can think of it in terms of borders and border control and stuff like that. That's true. We can, think of kind of the arbitrary things of state lines or something like that. But a lot of times, like, okay, we had a church dinner a couple weeks ago at my church, and before we went to get our food, my wife set her purse down at a particular place on the table, and I set my phone down on a place near it. And neither of us were really thinking we are now marking our territory, but that's what we were doing. We wanted to know that that was the place that we were going to come back to sit. And since especially her purse is fairly recognizable to people who know us, people might come in who want to talk to us and place their things so that their territory can be near ours. And that's kind of a way that we do that. Anytime when you take something and you assume you have some kind of right over a space, that's your territory. And the ways in which you mark your territory are usually visual. They're usually something people can see. For humans, we all know how dogs do it. I'd love to hear from you about this. I'd like to hear about some of your thoughts on nonverbal communication. It'd be really great if you can touch on examples of things that I didn't mention here, right? That I didn't mention this part of nonverbal communication or that part of nonverbal communication. And it's really important to the way that you communicate. If you're one of my students, I'd like you to write about that in the discussion prompts here on the Canvas page you're using. But if you're not one of my students at Western New Mexico University, I would still love to hear from you. And you can go ahead and put your information, put your comments in the comment section below, and tell me all about how nonverbal communication affects your life.